what's going on in the Middle East. Something is blasting. Last time we talked, it was totally different world. Right now is drastic changes are happening in the Middle East. And the latest, Mark, the news show that Donald Trump is somehow wants to go on the ground in Iran. They're talking about the Khark Island. They're talking about the southern part of Iran, sending the troops, Marines there, to invade Iran. And so far, what we've heard from them that they have destroyed everything, Navy, Air Force, air defense system. What is your understanding of what is happening right now on the battlefield and the whole dynamic politically and militarily?
Yeah, there was a quote from The Economist, of all places, the British news magazine that is, you know, um, extremely pro-Western,
Mark,
anti-Russian.
Mark, sorry for interrupting you. Please go to boosty.to @ the real politic. This is Mark's webpage, and he's putting a lot of stuff there. You can find them so much so you can find a lot of information there, and you are gonna enjoy it. I'm sure about it. Go ahead, Mark. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, not at all. I mean, if you have a bit of a masochistic tendency for more cynicism and fatalism and realism, then by all means. So yeah, The Economist had a quote in the last week. It was from one of their reporters that he was commenting on Twitter X, and he said that yes, evidently it's true that the United States has destroyed 100% of Iran's military capabilities. However, that it's that 0% of Iran's military capabilities that is destroying Middle Eastern Gulf Arab state energy infrastructure, closing the Strait of Hormuz and sending the global energy markets and economy into a crisis. The Trump administration, as it has in so many other situations, its propaganda rhetoric is of the caliber that would make Baghdad Bob blush. Right? I mean, it's an absurd fantasy land. The U.S. is this absurd, court of the emperor with no clothes, and no one is allowed to say. I mean, the Western mainstream media doesn't dare say, yeah, none of that is true. I mean, it's quite amazing what a completely propaganda blinded society that they live in. It's quite frightening, of course, because it leads to all kinds of screwy foreign policy choices like we're seeing right now. The reality of the situation is that the U.S. believed U.S. and Israel believed that they were going to achieve regime change probably within days. Right? They believed that with decapitation strikes, taking out the supreme leader and a lot of the top military and political leaders, that the regime was fragile, it would collapse, and then something, and then regime change. I mean, that's the classic South Park meme of gnomes collecting underpants. Phase 1, gnomes collect underpants. Phase 2, question mark. Phase 3, profit. Right? I mean, and that's the story here. Phase 1, drop some bombs and kill some people. Phase 2, question mark. Phase 3, regime change. Right? Of course, it didn't happen that way because the U.S. government operates from a caricatured assessment of all of its adversaries, Iran, but also Russia, China, the experts, quote unquote, who inform the U.S. government about these countries, and probably most countries in the world, to be honest, are the anti-Iranian, anti-Russian, anti-Chinese ideologues that have an extremely distorted views of the realities of these countries. So, they believe that, oh, the majority of the Iranian people is just waiting to achieve freedom and throw off their dictatorship. And if we just kill their supreme leader, that's it. It will all be over, and then they'll have freedom and kumbaya. That they believe that. They believe their own propaganda Kool-Aid. And, after the episode in Venezuela, right, which really wasn't a military success. It had very little to do with the military. It was a CIA success where Delcy Rodriguez and Victor Lopez and other top figures in the Venezuelan government were co-opted or blackmailed or, whatever it is that they do. And they turned Maduro over to the United States, which is why there was really no fighting except for his Cuban bodyguard, evidently. And there's a reason why he had Cuban bodyguard. And the Trump administration, and some of his top people obviously were riding a neocon Viagra high coming out of that. So they had all kinds of inflated beliefs in their own power and what that power could achieve on other countries coming out of Venezuela. And enough of the U.S.'s top military people, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, tried to warn them that, well, this probably isn't going to be that easy, that it is going to be difficult, and it probably won't work out that way. And the same thing with the CIA's intelligence assessment, that the regime would probably not fall, that the IRGC would just become more embedded, right, and more in power. And, that's exactly what we've seen. They wanted to believe otherwise. Trump wanted to believe otherwise. Witkoff and Kushner, who are not only his two top diplomats, Witkoff being his real estate buddy from New York and Kushner his son-in-law, but obviously they're his close advisors on everything too, right? And that type of, nepotism with incompetence and leads to all sorts of things. We heard from a British diplomat this week that they believed that Kushner and Witkoff were essentially Israeli assets. So, that's why. Now, I don't believe that, the U.S. was pressured and tricked and dragged into this. Trump may act like a puerile, overgrown man-child, but he is not, right? He is an adult. He's the leader of still, in many ways, the most powerful country in the world. And the U.S. doesn't get dragged into anything. The U.S. does the dragging. So that's not to absolve Trump or of any responsibility for what has happened. But the regime change didn't happen. Even after the supreme leader, the head of the IRGC, and numerous the defense minister, numerous other people were killed, and gathering them all together in one place while the U.S. is setting up an armada off your shores, that was dumb. Let's be honest. Did they have some mass martyrdom pact or what? Which also doesn't make much sense considering that all of the Ayatollah's family was there as well. His wife, his children, his grandchildren, right? They were wiped out as well. And you have to think, if you have some type of Shia martyrdom death wish, it probably doesn't involve taking out your children and grandchildren and wife as well. So, why they thought they could have this meeting, and I don't know. And it was stupid. And, Darwinian survival check, they failed. If the U.S. is sitting off your coast and they have a penchant for decapitation strikes, you don't all gather your top people together. Let's be frank about that. But they did, and what they did do beforehand is the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei set out that each top government military people should have a chain of succession going down at least 4 levels. So there was people to step into all of these places. And while the U.S. and Israel obviously believed the whole thing would collapse, instead, it appears actually to have been working maybe a little better without maybe some of these people in the top positions. They went into a mosaic defense mode automatically that devolved power to different regional commands, all operating, with very little to none central oversight, according to prearranged orders and their own assessments. And replacements stepped right into place for all of these people. For the supreme leader, his own son, it's a question whether he is technically an Ayatollah yet, but Mujtaba, and he is
He is Ayatollah.
Is he an Ayatollah? Okay, all right. So he has been declared an Ayatollah. He is, what the Western media describes as a hardliner. He's worked extensively with the IRGC, right? I mean, he is, and he, through his work with the whole security apparatus, you have to believe that he has a firmer, shall we say, less clerical, less maybe too academic, idealistic vision of the world that perhaps his father had. He's a little more grounded in the grim reality, I would say, by everything that we've heard. And you have to remember that this supreme leader now just had his father killed, his wife killed, his children killed in the these attacks by the U.S. and Israel. So a bit of an axe to grind there, I would say. I mean, the chances of diplomacy and at this point seem very slim to none to me. I mean, for a whole host of reasons. Not only that, but what the U.S. has done, what Israel continues doing, and Israel is continuing decapitation strikes. In the last week, we've seen the Secretary of the National Security Council, who has, by all accounts, been running the country in military mode since the death of the supreme leader, Larijani. He was killed. The intelligence minister was killed. The IRGC spokesperson was killed. The head of the Basij was killed. Right? That's just in the last week. Right? So the decapitation strikes continue, and there's an argument to be made that Israel is actually killing off anyone and everyone, particularly those who might be seen. Larijani was viewed as, at the very least, pragmatic, willing to negotiate, because Israel doesn't want any negotiation. They want the U.S. to be forced to forced may be too strong a word, but to ride this to the end, whatever that end may be. But despite all of the claims of completely wiping out Iranian air defense, Iran completely wiping out Iran's missile launchers and drone launch facilities and everything, we see that that's quite not obviously the case. Are we on the 70-something round of missiles being launched from Iran? Some 3 or so waves.
It's 71, yeah.
71, yeah. And actually, in the last few days, those numbers have ticked up. Not insignificantly for missiles, for ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, but dramatically for drone launches. Drone launches have just gone up in the past few days. So quite obviously, that is not true. I posted them on my own page. I'm sure many of you out there have seen them. These underground, hardened, very not just holes in the ground, very high-tech facilities underground. Iran knew this was coming. They've known this and they built hardened underground facilities to launch their missiles, to launch their drones, to store their fast speedboats and anti-ship cruise missiles and so forth, which makes them very hard to target and destroy. So they have enough of these, obviously, that they are able to continue. And, the command and control is working surprisingly well. And despite the claims that Iranian air defense has been completely destroyed, in the past 2 days, we just received word of an F-35 vaunted stealth fighter hit, possibly survived and returned to a Gulf base, but definitely hit. And according to the Iranians, hit in Iranian airspace. So quite obviously, the air defense is still kicking. So now we're in that long-range strike war of attrition, after the failure to get regime change that we were in June of 2025. And this is exactly what I have been warning about, others in the alt media as well, that this was, the stupidity for the US of getting involved in this war, because their Achilles heel, their weakness, is their low stockpiles and extremely low production rate of critical munitions, particularly air defense, right? The Patriot, the PAC-3 interceptors, the THAAD interceptors, which it makes less than 100 a year. The PAC-3 interceptor, something like 620. I mean, that's nothing when you have to fire 2, 3, or sometimes, as we've seen in the last week, 6 or 7 interceptors at a single ballistic missile, and sometimes still not hitting it. So there's actually an open question about the effectiveness of the Patriot system and the THAAD system, perhaps as well. But not only the defense, right, the air and missile defense, but also critically low levels of precision standoff munitions, primarily the Tomahawk and the JASSMs, which is an air-launched cruise missile. And from everything you can tell, that the armada, the fleet, and armada might be too grandiose a word, the fleet that the U.S. assembled off the coast of Iran has apparently fired off all of the Tomahawks that they had, or just about. And there's not an easy way for them to be reloaded. They can't do that at sea. They have to go to a base. And all of the U.S. bases in the Middle East have been targeted and continue to be targeted on a regular basis, which means they have to go to Crete or somewhere, in the Pacific to reload, which is why now everything seems to have shipped to these JASSM, these air-launched cruise missiles. But still, there's still a limited supply of those as well, right? A few thousand, and that was before this conflict. With no ability to rapidly replace those numbers, right? So as long as Iran can keep stiff-arming the U.S., keep some semblance of air defense, and force them outside of Iranian airspace so that they have to use these standoff missiles to hit Iran, that they have, low numbers of, that's very good for Iran. And that's, by and large, as far as we can tell, what has happened so far. Now, if the U.S. manages to achieve some level of air dominance over Iran, then they can switch from the standoff precision weapons that they have very limited numbers of to ordnance like the JDAM, which is old dumb gravity bombs fitted with glide kits. They have to be like within 40 nautical miles range in order to launch those, right? So in or very close to Iranian airspace, and depending on what you want to hit, where in Iran, like in Iranian airspace. And they have effectively, infinite numbers of those, or, effectively. And when Donald Trump made these bizarre claims, he has enough munitions, that's what he was actually talking about, or, and that's the way he interpreted whatever it is was explained to him. Now, that would be very bad for Iran. If they can fully switch to using JDAMs or even gravity bombs, old dumb gravity bombs, then they can just bomb and bomb and bomb Iran months. It's a very bad, it would be a very bad situation for Iran. But that is not the situation as of still today, 3 weeks into the conflict. We saw that air defense is still taking down drones. They're taking down F-35s. So they've still got something left and kicking. And that's keeping the U.S. outside of Iranian airspace, and that's good for Iran. And the way Iran has responded is not only to hit Israel this time, but to hit all of the Gulf state vassals, allies, the Arab Gulf state allies that have U.S. military bases, which is practically all of them, that have been used to launch this attack. And they have been hitting, following an escalatory plan, an escalatory ladder. If you hit our energy facilities, we hit their energy facilities, right? And this is coupled with the de facto closing of the Hormuz Straits, at least to all Gulf and Western traffic. Now, Iran's own traffic is still going through the Hormuz, right? They're actually, according to some reports, exporting more oil through the Hormuz than they were before the conflict. And Chinese-bound tankers are going through, some Pakistani, some Indian. So, anyone who's not part of the West, can make arrangements. But the coupling of the damage to the energy infrastructure of these Gulf state countries and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, this is Iran's sanction option. This is their nuclear option. They are waging an asymmetric war against the United States and Israel. Their job is to make the energy markets scream, thus making the global economy scream until Trump and Netanyahu stop. That's their whole game right now. And it's an enormous amount of leverage. The U.S. has no ability, right, to unblock the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. Navy, Trump made comments about it like a week ago. Oh, we're going to, clear it out. We're going to escort ships. And the Navy's like, no, we're not. You see how long that coastline is against Iran to get into the Strait of Hormuz? And we'd be hit by drones and missiles and anti-ship cruise missiles and sea mines, if they laid those, as anything. There's so much. And then the Navy's like, no, we're not going in there. that's a death trap. We've war gamed that out. It doesn't end well for us. And then Trump tried to get all of his allies, right, or ostensible allies, the UK, France, Japan, South Korea, even China. Well, you all have to go in and free the Strait of Hormuz. And everyone's like, yeah, no, you got this. And he was furious. He's throwing petulant fits like a child, threatening NATO, all of this stuff. But the reality is the U.S. has met another geopolitical hard limit. And that is right now, Iran has escalation dominance in this conflict through keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed and the ability to inflict damage on the energy infrastructure of the U.S.'s Gulf state vassals, allies, and so forth. And this really came to a head in the last 48 hours when Israel / the U.S., take your reading, attacked Iran's South Pars gas field. And this is the largest gas field in the world. So it's a big deal. And this gas field, it actually, it runs, under. It actually is connected with Qatar. The Iranian side, it's called the South Pars, but it's actually, the north side of that, and, south to Qatar. And what Iran immediately hit in retaliation was the Qatari Ras Laffan LNG facilities, which they destroyed 17% of Qatar's LNG liquidation and refinement capacity. Now their whole LNG was already shut down because of the threats of damage of drones and everything else. They're the second biggest exporter of LNG in the world, which has led to gas prices, natural gas prices going through the roof, particularly in Europe and for countries like South Korea and Japan that are heavily reliant on it. But now this is permanent damage, right? And they say the damage is extensive. This is not something that they can just replace and repair overnight. This cost them tens of billions of dollars to install, and it took them years to do that. So even if this conflict ended tomorrow, the markets, the gas markets, would not return to normal for years into the future. Now Trump immediately backed off, blamed it all on Netanyahu. Meanwhile, the Israelis saying the U.S. was fully involved in this whole affair, and that's probably likely. It seems that Trump. I don't know why they didn't believe the Iranians would immediately strike back on their own escalatory playbook, but they did, and the markets went in. The energy markets went insane, and the U.S. says, "Oh, no more attacks on those things, not yet, anyway. Stop. Israel, stop. And then more threats in Iran. But quite obviously, what Trump was doing was backing down, right? Because he was afraid of Iran's further retaliatory strikes and how that could, for years into the future. I mean, Iran has a whole hit list, an escalatory hit list of facilities all over the Middle East they can hit that will, as the U.S. and Israel step up the escalatory ladder against Iran, they can move up that ladder and permanently cripple the energy and trade markets in the Gulf, which of course will affect the whole world. And this is amazing. Until now, really, or maybe the last year, maybe you could count China's use of rare earths as leverage against the U.S. as well. But until the last year, really, the U.S. had this position as the hegemon, right? That they weaponized their economy and the global financial architecture they controlled against other countries, right? With sanctions, with cutting off of SWIFT, all of this, existential economic warfare that they waged against Russia. And Russia weathered it, but they didn't really have the means to strike back directly. Well, Iran is in an existential situation, and they have the means, and they have hit back at the global energy markets, the global economy, and weaponized the global economy against the United States, right? And they've called into question the entirety of the relationship between these Gulf Arab states and the United States, because supposedly the U.S. is there to provide them security. And the opposite is happening. They are being targeted because the U.S. is there and using, it's the facilities they provided to them. So this has enormous global economic and global order potentially changing consequences, like the conflict in Ukraine, but particularly as far as energy, things perhaps to an even greater extent. This is amazing. And the conflict has already spread across the entirety of the Middle East and beyond, right? We've had actions from Sri Lanka all the way to Crete. I mean, that's how far this conflict has spread. And in the north, from the Caspian and Georgia, all the way down to, the southern points of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. This is a regional conflict. It has spread horizontally so fast, involved so many countries.